It is Friday, September 25th, 2020. I'm Pastor Thor Ramsey with Center Church. This is Gospel for Five, where we take 5 minutes out of our day and focus on the gospel and the one who saved our soul. Today we're in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 24, where Jesus is telling us about the future. This whole chapter is what we would really call a chapter of the prophecies of Jesus, so to speak. In one sense, these are eschatological. It's a 25-cent word that just means dealing with the end times, the end of time, the end of things. Verse 14 of chapter 24, and this gospel of the kingdom, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. So there you have it. This gospel that the church is given the responsibility, that Christians are given the responsibility to proclaim, to preach, is a testimony of the truthfulness. It's a testimony that God has spoken to the world. Now, in what way is the testimony of the gospel, is proclamation of the gospel a testimony that this is truth, that Jesus Christ is the way, that Jesus is the truth, that he's the life, and no one will come to the Father except through him, that no one will be saved except through looking to Jesus Christ. Again, as I said yesterday, God did not send us a system or a method to be saved. He sent us a person who lived the life we couldn't live, who died the death that we deserved, and then rose again to show us he has the authority to forgive our sins as we embrace him. Well, it's a testimony in a number of ways, but the primary way it's a testimony is that the gospel itself is the power of God, and as the gospel is proclaimed, as the person of Christ is proclaimed, people believe Christ and they are changed, and they then testify, I have met the risen Christ. Have you seen the risen Christ? No. But I'm even more blessed because Jesus said, blessed are those who haven't seen me and yet believe. We are even a more blessed generation, poor Thomas, doubting Thomas, than Thomas himself and his generation who saw Christ. We hear the testimony and the Spirit gives us ears to hear, and we have believed and we've experienced the true and risen Christ. In actuality, we've actually experienced the risen Christ. And at the judgment seat of Christ, God will point to all those who truly met Christ and say, that is true testimony. What did you think was going on with these people? That it was just a psychological need they were fulfilling? That they were naive? That they were just a little more... they were a little dumber than you were to buy into all this, that you were so brilliant that you saw through this? That will not be the case. It will be the case that the testimony, the changed lives of everyone who hears the gospel and embraces Christ, their changed lives, our changed lives, will be a testimony to all nations that Christ is risen from the dead, that he is exactly who these gospels proclaim he is. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And then the end will come. Now, whatever you think the end is going to look like, we know this much. All those who believe in the second coming of Christ believe multiple things, but they believe all these things. You can debate the order all you want, but we know for a fact these things are going to happen. Christ is going to return. The church will be raptured with Christ, but he will return and he will judge the living and the dead, and then he will set up his kingdom on this earth, a new heaven and new earth, and then reign forever as those who have been asleep. In other words, those who have been dead will rise from the dead also at the return of Christ. Now, whatever order you want to put those in, or however you want lay that out. There is room for gracious debate in that matter, but before any of that happens, before you want to even debate what the end is actually going to look like, the gospel's got to go out. The gospel will go out to all nations as a testimony that every human heart and mind who heard of the person of Jesus should turn to Jesus. But the testimony is that all those who heard and did turn to Jesus turned to Jesus because Jesus is alive. Now, what has God said to you today? And what do you